We believe our first responsibility is to the doctors, nurses, and patients, to mothers and fathers and all others who use our products and service.
We are responsible to our employees, the men and women who work with us throughout the world.
我们要对我们所生活和工作的社会，对整个世界负责。
We must be good citizens, support good work and charities, and bear our fair share of taxes.
We must encourage civic improvements and better health and education. We must maintain in good order the property we are privileged to use.
It's an understatement to say that we are today living in a skeptical society, one in which questions and doubts have been raised about many of our institutions and the people responsible for running them. Now, more than ever, business in general and large corporations in particular have become a focal point of interest and scrutiny by government, by news organizations, by the public. Today we're going to attempt to look at the policies of one company, Johnson & Johnson, which had its origins here in New Brunswick, New Jersey, some 90 years ago. There were 12 employees when the company began its operations, and today there are more than 50,000 employees on 6 continents. They produce more than 10,000 products that help to meet the health care needs of millions of people. During Johnson & Johnson's growth and expansion, the chairman of the board, Robert Wood Johnson, decided to write a company credo. He did write it in the early 1940s. It is a one-page statement of the principles that General Johnson felt should be the guidelines for operating the company. The credo states that the first responsibility of the company is to the consumers and to all members of the medical profession who use Johnson & Johnson products. And in the first section, the quality of the company's products receives strong emphasis. Second, the credo declares a responsibility to each of the company's employees, and a concern for their welfare is expressed in clear terms. The third responsibility is to the management of the company, and here reference is made to the need for people with experience, ability, common sense, and understanding. The fourth point in the credo has to do with the responsibility the company has to communities in which Johnson & Johnson people work and live. It states that the company must take part in promoting civic improvement, health, education, and government. The fifth and last responsibility the credo sets out is to the stockholders of the company and the means by which Johnson & Johnson is to make a sound profit and give the stockholders a fair return.
Despite constant change in the business scene, this philosophy helps us to find better answers for the problems of the day, ours and yours.
I feel like I'm helping. I feel like I'm making the patients better at my own way, like making the syrups. Yes. I think I've always kept that image of my brother in the back of my 20s was lying there at the intensive care unit with all those needles and pins in his arms and all those medication that was pumped into him 24/7. Then you're hoping that that medication has the same quality as the medication I try to make here. It's all about helping people. Knowing that you will help people all around the world, day in, day out, maybe with small things, a coughing syrup, but knowing that you make a difference in people's lives every day again. Yes, for me it's quite satisfying.
And that is an opportunity for really a large group of the top people who are really making it happen in Johnson & Johnson to re-examine themselves and to re-examine the principles of the corporation, to ask themselves, are those principles valid? And if they're valid, can we live with them? And if we can live with them, are we performing our role in seeing to it that the company lives with them? I would hope that in the next couple of days, you will all feel free to create some controversy here, because again, I don't think we're going to get much out of this next 2 days unless we do create that.
He's made a decision and it was good or bad, but good or bad against what? If you've got almost every manager, I'll go to an extreme, interpreting himself what it should be, it's like playing golf and everybody has their own par, okay? That's essentially what you're saying. That's why I disagree with it. I think it should be an absolutes. I don't think it's a very easy thing to live up to in these days and these times. But I think we should strive to it. It's striving. We get them to strive towards something, and that's an absolute.
I have trouble looking on our credo as that kind of a regulation, because I find the need to resolve inconsistencies between its principles when used to assess the performance of the individual that John mentioned. Because he can rightly come back to you and say, our credo says we are to make a sound profit, and that's what I did. How can you possibly fire me for doing that?
Any guy that runs a business, and in our case we're juggling 5 colored balls, okay? 4 of them are, let's say they're white ones, the first 4 tenets of this thing. The 5th one's a bright red one, and it says profit. And everybody knows in this room that's running a business that he better not drop that red one, or he's going to be in deep trouble. What he really doesn't know or perceive frequently is, what does that mean in terms about those other 4? Which one can I drop first, or can I fumble that one, or where do I give a little? But he sure knows all about that bright red one. I think it's a balance of things.
Picking up Bob's point here, you can't kid yourself. The purpose of a business is to make a profit. We're capitalists. This country was built on it. This business was built on it. And we can't let all of this discussion degenerate down into something that says that fulfilling that objective is not very nice.
I don't know that anybody is really saying that.
Oh, there's an undercurrent. There's an undercurrent to that. There's an undercurrent.
I don't know whether there's an undercurrent.
Let me say this. Everything you say, Jack, is true. But I think we're all losing sight of what the general was trying to say. At least, and I firmly believe in what he was trying to say. And when Russell Baker was talking about the old pirate barons, I agree with him. And I dare say that he was agreeing with the general. Because under our industrial society at that point in time, there were abuses. There's no question about that. And what is coming to the fore now are pressures from society, demands from society, which these pirate barons in the past were never confronted with. But we're going to be confronted with them more and more, and that's what General Johnson was saying. And he was saying to us that unless we meet these demands, someone, number one, the government, is going to force us to meet. And should we not, therefore, do what is best for the business, not only what is morally and ethically correct, but what is best for the business, by following the concepts of the Credo, so that we do meet needs of society, and therefore are able to do things better rather than the government, and cheaper rather than the government, and do things which are basically right and decent and human.
Charlie, that's motherhood and apple pie. And God, we're all in agreement with that. The question is, which of these things are legitimate demands of society, and how many of these can we fulfill and stay in business?
Well, making a profit all by itself is not the issue. What we're talking about is a set of principles that you can't make a profit at the expense of all of these other things.
That's the point. That is the point.
That we must meet all of those philosophies or principles in the Credo if we're going to accept the profit that will come out the bottom.
I'm not suggesting that, but I don't want to see us necessarily diminish the importance of number 5.
You know, we go round and round on this, just like we did in our own small group on this very subject. And I think that Jim's words that he used yesterday when he brought this subject up is, we're not challenging whether the executive committee believes in it or wants to practice it, but the question that Jim puts to us is, do we sometimes get some conflicting signals? And I think in our group we were saying yes. We do get some conflicting signals.
You know, one of the things that I find most interesting is this, what I would call and concept that's embedded in the Credo, in that it raises the bar for all of us to look out for our patients, consumers, mothers, fathers, and our employees, and our communities, and our shareholders. It's not an and/or approach.
Every paragraph has a series of must actions. It's not a wouldn't it be nice to kind of document. You know, it's a must directive.
This gives people permission to say, I'm not comfortable with where we are. I'm not comfortable with the decision we're about to make, because let's go back to the Credo and actually reground ourselves in what's important.
How much do we invest in the long term of our business at the expense of the short term, or vice versa? These are decisions that you and your teams make every single day.
When you think about the word first in the first paragraph, you think about the word final. It does, for me, mean that if we do these first three things, then the shareholder should expect a fair return.
I think all 4 paragraphs have to work in unison, but I'm not so sure that if you just did patients, customers, employees, and communities, that shareholders would automatically receive a fair return.
The tension comes when we never miss the fair profit to the shareholder, but sometimes we might not experiment with things we think are right for the long term of the business for the sake of the return and the bottom line. And that's, I think people see that tension there.
There shouldn't be a tension on certain aspects. You have to earn the right to be in healthcare, and it comes with an obligation. And I think the responsibility to patients is one where you're allowed to sell products in this space if you take care of the patients you work for.
As long as you sit down and ask yourself, what is the purpose of running a hospital or being a doctor? Back to the basic, to ask you the basic questions. If you have that in your mind, and then you know there are some borderlines you cannot come across. Sometimes you have to compromise, you have to sacrifice, but there are bottom lines. If you have that red line in your heart, you will not lose your direction. That's simple. Sometimes it sounds complicated. There are so many strategies, tools, or other things. It's getting more and more professional and complicated. But sometimes if you look at it, you may find that you actually lost yourself to some extent. You yourself becoming the tool of making profit. But if you look at yourself and ask yourself the basic questions, then you will know. Then you will be clear that there are something that should be done and there are something that could not be done.
We must provide competent management, and their actions must be just and ethical. You know, are we embracing that with all our leaders throughout the organization?
When there are issues, it's typically because of poor management, and when the workforce is engaged and feeling good about what they're doing and purposeful, in large part it's the environment that the manager is creating to keep their workforce in the game with us.
I had one employee ask me, the tax optimization program is consistent with the spirit of Credo, where Credo tells us that we must bear our fair share of taxes.
Yes, we do put into play certain tax strategies, but think about what we can accomplish by doing that. What are we able to invest in? New technologies? What are we able to contribute to the communities in which we live and work? But how do we balance that third paragraph with other paragraphs of the Credo?
I view that paragraph as not necessarily only the responsibility of our corporation, but I view it as a personal responsibility. I don't look to J&J to fulfill that responsibility for me.
I won't let you get off that easily.
Okay.
Credo talks about our responsibility as a company, right? That's what it's about. It's not about what you do individually. It's about us as a company. The Credo front and center says, you know, we as a corporation must be good citizens. We are responsible to the world community as well. That's a large task.
How do we define community? Community yesterday is not the same as today, and tomorrow generations are changing. We see developing countries who are going to be the developed countries. I mean, there are a lot of dynamics.
It's a question, though, that we're going to be asked on an ongoing basis, which is, so what is Johnson & Johnson doing to be a good corporate citizen in our country? How can you partner with us? How can you help?
How do we know if we're doing enough, not enough, too much? And this looks great on paper, but it's how you actually deploy it, and what happens when push comes to shove.
When you have technologies which are blocking the world from getting better healthcare, then you don't do enough. So I think there is an obligation. It's not always quantified in dollars, but if you own technology which can make the world a better place and you don't want to exploit that, give it to somebody else.
We are more aware of the different challenges that exist in health, and therefore the responsibility that the company has to make the solutions, the services, the products available, that responsibility is of a higher level than it was before.
To me, this is not only to be measured by dollars and investments. I think it's primarily measured to how we behave, how we connect with the external world. For me, the third paragraph somehow underlines the importance of recognizing that we are just part of a bigger system.
This, more than anything else, I think can help provide people clarity, a sense of shared purpose. I think having this as a foundation is more important than anything to make sure our people are grounded here.
J&J was one of the first to realize that companies are actually citizens. Companies are playing an active role in society, and they can only continue to do so if they give added value to society. Janssen joined Johnson & Johnson in 1961, but one of the reasons why they did so, I'm profoundly convinced of that, is that Johnson & Johnson shared a certain ethical value, among which the value or the belief that a company should be a good citizen to the world, but also a good citizen to the microenvironment in which it lives and works.
There is an expectation, I think because we're J&J, people do see us doing more than just the bare minimum. But there is, like someone said earlier, there's a cost, right? I mean, we spend a lot of money, a lot of time, and that money could either go into R&D or could go into shareholder returns. So those are the conflicts that exist here.
I am very proud that in the space of HIV we have been able to make massive impact on the world while we are still making a very good business in the West. We are deploying the technology and the drugs we have in the emerging markets where people have no ability to pay. And in the meantime, several millions of people are now getting between 10 and 20 years of additional life because of products we provide.
If you're not doing the right things in social responsibility, it is then going to cascade to your reputation, which ultimately is going to be reflected in shareholders. It relates to attracting the right employees. And we've talked about that. The employees of the future, and frankly that we have today, have a higher expectation on us as an organization around what we're doing for the communities, let alone the communities themselves. And stakeholders now, whether it be NGOs, whether it be governments, other groups, it's so important for us to be able to relate to our communities around what we're doing, working with them. And by the way, I think it's the only way that we have any possibility whatsoever to help solve this major challenge that we have around healthcare now, is by being able to work as part of a greater community, because no one of us is going to be able to do it on our own.
So in the end, it's always about choices, and there are legitimate differences. But there are dark gray areas where everybody afterwards will say, you know, let's be honest, this was not the most ethical decision that we made. And the Credo actually forces us to say, okay, when faced with media, when faced with a very critical journalist, are we able to pass the red face test? And is this really the decision that we can stand up to and say, yes, I really believe that this was the most ethical decision? Taking into account not only my own profit, which is in itself a legitimate concern, but also the concern of the people, short-term and long-term. And very often it's not that easy. If you have a product with side effects, the side effects in itself are bad, but that product in itself may be an invaluable tool in the medical profession. So what you actually have to do is not to just abandon the product, nor to promote it beyond its border, but it's actually to finding the right niche and to help the world use the product correctly. That is what ethics is all about. It's very rarely an easy thing.
If there is a time, I guess, where J&J should stick to the credo, it's probably now. I think they've gone through a significant storm, and as an outsider, the credibility of J&J has got a serious hit. I think we, as ex-J&J, other people, we were extremely surprised by what happened, and we couldn't believe the sequence of one event after the other, and how it was possible having worked there. So I think this is probably the time to take the credo again and revitalize the principles that are in there, because, like I said, the true value principles that will help people to create a profitable business and satisfy customer is still there.
Sometimes.
When?
I think sometimes when my frankly, when my top manager did something that didn't meet the credo, we don't feel comfortable with that. Sometimes we are struggling whether he did the right thing. We don't think so, but.
So what can you do about that? Can you do anything?
Personally, I think if that will not impact our customer, maybe I can just live with that and see what will happen, and maybe just my misunderstanding, not the real thing, just my misunderstanding. If I can make sure that will impact our customer, I will escalate to my boss or the higher boss.
And you feel that you have permission to do that, that the company, that's where the credo asks you, like, to really be courageous, right?
Yeah. I think the best advantage for the credo is if after we have a credo, we can speak at the same page. For example, if I escalate some bad thing to the top management, I can say, oh, this thing between our credo and the words item. So we can talk at the same page. Yeah.
One of the important things where the credo lives for me in the day-to-day activities is in the teamwork that we do with the teams. A lot of the products that we generate are not necessarily results of a lot of machinery coming in and a lot of production processes necessarily, but before we get to those products, there is a lot of human energy that goes into that. And none of the drugs that we develop, none of the diagnostics we develop is ever there because of a single invention of a single person. It is always teamwork that goes on and on and on. And the scheme that you see in the back here is actually the scheme that displays the cycle of development of a compound. And you can see there is a lot of interactions there. There's a lot of people, a lot of touch points involved in getting to those products at the very end of this scheme. And it's critically important that those teams work well, operate well. And I think where the credo guides us very much is in how we deal with people, how we recognize the human component in the work we do. I always find it very important to keep an open mind, to listen to everybody, have everybody's voices heard, and then come with that joint knowledge to a conclusion that is in the best interest of the products we develop.
You have to work on long terms. Yes? If I want to become rich in 1 month, I have to steal a bank. If I want to become and think of long terms, I have to do that. As a doctor also, I can have a quick success, but normally that's not good. That is not on, you have to work on long terms. That's what the first says, and that is right.
Well, it's been about 70 years since General Robert Wood Johnson wrote our credo. And I think it's very important that from time to time we step back and we have a little deeper conversation about exactly what the credo means. And so what we're going to be doing is asking everybody in the organizations at the board levels, in our companies, through the different operating committees, the different leadership teams, in the course of the next year, to have this very same discussion, to really make it come alive, because I think it's not until you have that debate, the exchange, the contrast, and once in a while an argument, that we can ensure that it's more than a piece of paper.
The credo sits in somewhere between 150 and 200 of our locations, hangs on the walls at least. If the credo doesn't mean anything, we really ought to come to that conclusion and rip it off the walls and get on with the job.
Ik leef in een wereld die anders is. Al ben ik verdwaald in een bos waar geen uitweg is. Ik zie je en toch zie ik je niet. Ik hoor je, maar altijd versta ik het niet. Maar toch voel ik je liefde. Gevoel gaat nooit weg. Blijf met me praten, al herken ik niet altijd je stem. Maar ik heb het gevoel, ik ben niet vergeten. Gevoel gaat nooit weg. Ik zou je willen danken voor alles wat je voor mij doet. Maar de woorden, ik ben ze vergeten. Maar ik voel, op dank zit jij niet te wachten. Je doet alles uit liefde voor mij. Maar eens zal ik alles weer weten. Dan zal alles weer helder zijn. Maar voor het zo ver is, dwaalt mijn geest alsmaar verder door het bos waar ik geen uitweg zie. Dat is een mooi gedicht, hoor.
Als je dat gelezen hebt, wat doet u dat dan eigenlijk?
Wat zegt u?
Als je dat gelezen hebt, zo'n gedicht.
Ja, dat ontroert mij, hè. Ja, dat ontroert mij. En zo zijn er veel mensen, hè. Dat is dus iemand en die zit volledig in de wereld van Alzheimer, maar af en toe weten ze nog wat. Zij stelt zich in de plaats natuurlijk, hè. Maar zo is het. En dat ontroert mij. Ja. Dat moet, hè. Het is het gevoel, hè. Ik kan geen mensen helpen als ik geen gevoel heb. Mensen helpt je met liefde en met gevoel. En voor dementie heb ik veel liefde.